Runecraft is an ancient sacred force, said to have existed since humanity's very beginning. Those chosen few born with runecraft could bend the natural order to their will, ruling over everything beneath them. Ancient people worshipped runecraft as a divine gift, calling it nothing short of a miracle. But among all the countless runes that existed, one was seen as a curse rather than a blessing, the Azure Rune. The scene opens on a boy running through the snow, the Azure Rune marked clearly on his back. He is badly hurt, several arrows still lodged in his body, fleeing from a group chasing him. Once they see he has finally put enough distance between them, they shout after him, warning him never to show his face in their town again, calling him nothing but a monster. The furious crowd watches from a distance as he stumbles into the snowfield. Even once he's out of their sight, he doesn't stop running. He has no idea where he's headed, only that stopping means death. Since ancient times, it's said that anyone born with the Azura Rune brings nothing but destruction wherever they go. As dawn breaks, the exhausted boy finally collapses, bleeding out onto the freezing snow. Right before he loses consciousness, he catches a blurry glimpse of people rushing toward him, clearly shocked to find someone covered head to toe in blood. Unfortunately, he can no longer move. A man and his family approach him carefully, and the father urges his wife and daughter to use their runecraft to try and heal the boy. He passes out before he can say a single word. 7 years later, the story shifts to a quiet village. An old man is telling two strangers there's no one with the Azure Rune living there, reminding them they've already searched every last building. He tells them it's time to leave. The bald man and his companion turn to go, muttering that the old man is far too loud for their liking. Once they're clear of the village, the two report back to their superior. The bald man informs him there are no rune casters anywhere in the region. Their superior simply reaches out and beckons him closer, and the moment the man steps in, he drives his hand straight into his body, crushing his insides. Blood pours from the bald man's mouth as his terrified companion screams out his name. The superior watches coldly as the man crumples to the ground, calmly stating that people without runecraft or mana like them were never going to find his target anyway. The creature, with teeth like razors, claims he can smell it, the stench of ruin itself. Later that day, two villagers call out to a couple known as Van and Linda, telling them the strange men are finally gone. Van and Linda emerge from inside a hollow tree trunk, visibly relieved to finally breathe easy again. The couple who called out to them are the same pair who rescued Van 7 years earlier, and Linda is their daughter. The young man with long black hair is our main character, Van. He apologizes to Linda's father for bringing those strange visitors back to the village again. The man just smiles, telling him nobody around here really minds that. His wife gently brushes dust off both Van and Linda, asking why they always insist on hiding down there. Linda smiles and explains that Van simply likes the spot. Van turns toward the tree and reveals this is exactly where they saved him all those years ago, calling it his favorite place in the entire village. Linda's father wraps an arm around his neck, calling him a treasure of a kid, then turns to his wife to ask how the wedding preparations are coming along. She confirms everything is ready, and they'll begin the moment the sun goes down. That night, everyone gathers around a large bonfire deep in the forest, the surrounding trees decorated with hanging lanterns. Van stands nervously by the fire, a simple headband of leaves resting on his head, facing Linda, who looks nothing but happy. Her father declares the two of them husband and wife, asking them to speak their vows in front of everyone gathered. Linda promises the crowd she'll keep her husband so warm and happy that he'll forget what crying even feels like. The villagers cheer loudly for her. Van apologizes to everyone for putting them through trouble yet again. Wherever he has gone throughout his life, plagues, wars, massacres, and disaster always seem to follow. Screams of pain trailing behind him no matter where he settles. He's never truly found a place to belong. If this village hadn't taken him in 7 years ago, he would have died. Van admits to the crowd that he still isn't sure it was right for them to accept someone carrying the Azure Rune. The instant he says this, Linda punches him hard across the face, telling him to knock it off. Van hits the ground from the impact. She tells him plainly that if they had ever truly feared him, they never would have taken him in at all. She admits they were nervous when they first met him years ago, sure, but the moment real danger came for the village, he protected every single one of them on his own. Linda tells her husband they already made peace with that fear a long time ago. She smiles, promising they'll face whatever comes their way together, just like before. The villagers laugh, vowing to protect Van for life, one of them joking that he's far too soft-hearted, wondering how on earth he plans to keep up with someone like Linda. Van rises to his feet and faces his new wife. Linda's mother reminds them they still need to finish the ceremony. Van tells Linda he loves her, and she tells him she loves him too, sealing it with a gentle kiss. The moment their lips meet, a mysterious figure appears out of nowhere. He releases a wave of dark energy, remarking that he almost feels like crying. An instant later, a massive explosion rips through the forest. When Vaughn opens his eyes again, his hands are soaked in blood. Lifting his head, he's met with a horrifying scene, the ground littered with bodies, everyone drenched in blood. He collapses, screaming, unable to process what's happening or why it's happening now. Horror grips him as he stares at the field of corpses spread before him. He spots Linda's father, Partel, lying motionless on the ground, then calls out desperately for her mother, Carrara, already gone. Van has no idea what to do, reaching out helplessly, admitting through tears that he doesn't understand what's happening. Right then, the mysterious stranger appears behind him with a casual greeting. Vaughn jumps, startled by his voice, and the man sends him flying with a single punch. Vaughn's body crashes into a tree, slamming hard against it. The stranger drags Linda's badly injured body across the ground, singing softly about how Van's Azure Rune has finally been exposed, saying that everything hidden eventually comes to light. Vaughn demands to know who he is and why he's doing this. The man tells him the reason doesn't matter, that he simply has business with him. He reveals that someone out there wants to witness the true ruin his rune can unleash, admitting he wiped out every nearby village simply because leaving survivors would be too much trouble. Van is stunned. The man assures him it's nothing personal, just orders he's carrying out, asking Van not to hold too much of a grudge. With that, he surrounds Van with his energy, explaining this is a pocket dimension, a prison built specifically for him by someone else. He tells Van that time barely matters in there. 1,000 years or 10,000, it's all the same, and promises to release him when the time finally comes, though he admits even he doesn't know when that will be. Van stretches his arm out desperately, but branches formed from the man's power hold him in place. He turns toward his wife just in time to see her lips moving, mouthing something to him. She smiles gently once she finishes. Van reaches for her again the moment he sees that smile, but the pocket dimension refuses to let him go. Tears stream down his face as the prison seals shut around him, taking the shape of a sphere and locking him inside completely. Inside this prison world, Van lies motionless on a massive rock, thinking over the stranger's words about true ruin. He had always wanted to believe there was more to his life than just a cursed rune. Now, he realizes there was never really any escape for him to begin with. He tells himself his very existence brings nothing but ruin and death, that there was never a path around this fate. He wonders if Partel, Carrara, and Linda might still be alive if he had simply accepted that truth sooner. For the first time in his life, he had let himself hope things could be different, that he might actually live something like a normal life. Now he thinks that foolish hope and selfish wish is exactly what got everyone killed. The moment this thought crosses his mind, countless spirits close in around him from every direction. Van doesn't move, too shattered to react. He simply apologizes to them, over and over, thousands of times, begging the dead not to forgive him. In his head, he wonders if gods even exist, and if so, why one would curse him with something this cruel. He quickly realizes it's pointless to wonder. What could the gods possibly do for him now, anyway? Exhausted, in agony, and simply tired of living, he closes his eyes, hoping death will come peacefully. Right then, he remembers his wife telling him none of this was his fault. Even with blood running from her eyes, Linda had still smiled, promising she would love him forever. Van's eyes snap open at the memory. He forces himself upright, his shirt tearing as his hair grows longer. He argues with her memory, insisting this really is his fault. His eyes flash red as he asks himself why he was even looking for peace, calling his own thoughts nonsense, disgusted that he'd almost taken the easy way out. He lifts his head and screams, telling himself he can't die yet, not with something left unfinished, his expression twisted with fury. Vaughn declares he still needs revenge. He remembers the sea of bodies, remembers everyone who ever told him the Azure Rune only brings ruin. He screams that he no longer cares, that no ruin could possibly be worse than what he's already lost. He remembers the man's words, that someone out there wants the true ruin of his rune, and Van roars, releasing a terrifying surge of power, vowing he'll show that person exactly what ruin looks like firsthand. He thinks of the villagers and the family who once took him in, silently asking them for a little more time, promising he'll join them again once his revenge is done. To get that revenge, Van first needs to escape this pocket dimension. He forces himself to stand as the spirits around him take physical form, twisting into monstrous shapes with countless heads, all charging at him at once, screaming that he's the reason they're dead, demanding he die too. Vaughn unleashes dark energy in response, swearing he'll have his revenge even if it takes 10,000 years, his face twisted with pure hatred as he says it. And with that, he throws himself into battle against the demons, tearing through them with nothing but his fists and feet. 200 years pass, and Vaughn is still fighting. By year 400, he's still tearing the monsters apart. By year 600, the spirits have merged into one massive, grotesque creature, a giant with 1,000 heads. Van stands before it, hatred still burning inside him. The boy who once walked the path of the Azura Rune now dances through pure ruin. Even though he's grown far stronger, he still hasn't unlocked the true power hidden within the rune. By year 999, Van charges the massive creature head-on. It slams a giant hand down, smashing him into the ground. He forces himself back up, drenched in blood, drowning in despair, endless agony crashing over him. Yet the fire of vengeance inside him refuses to go out. He charges again. The monster raises its hand once more and slams him down so hard the entire dimension shakes. It pulls its hand back, soaked in blood. Van lies broken on the ground, bones shattered, consciousness slipping away. In this fading moment, he remembers asking Linda about her dreams once, out in an open field. She told him she wanted to be his wife, to make her parents his in-laws too, and dreamed of having one son and one daughter. She stood up and told him she wanted a home he would always come back to. Smiling, a gentle breeze stirred the flowers around her as she added that she wanted a fence too, something to keep him safe. She smiled, telling him that was her dream. Van's eyes fully open as the memory washes over him, and in that instant, the true power of his rune finally awakens. A twisted-looking demon grins the moment it happens. Van screams in agony as his body forces itself upright, dark energy pouring out of him, dragging bodies scattered across the ground and pulling them into himself to form something new. A massive explosion rocks the prison, and when the smoke clears, Van stands in a set of black armor. He instantly understands this is the true power of ruin. Azura, the god of ruin, once used this power to summon armor known as Helms. Van steps forward, realizing that if he'd had this power from the start, no one would have had to die. He clenches his fist and settles into a fighting stance, grinning at the monster like a man who's lost his mind. He throws a punch into empty air, and the strike tears straight through the creature's stomach, sending it flying backward until it crashes to the ground. Van leaps forward, wrapping his fist in energy as he activates his first manifested armament, a technique called Annihilation Fist. Through it, he wields a gauntlet capable of breaking down matter at the particle level, its destructive power tied directly to the user's mana. He drives a bone-shattering punch into the monster's head. It grits its teeth, but there's no withstanding the blow. Van crushes it entirely, the impact splitting open the ground beneath them as a massive explosion tears through the prison. Back in the real world, a woman begs 3 bandits to spare her life, insisting she has no money left. They've already killed her husband. Their leader crouches beside her, casually saying he'll just take a few of her organs instead. At that exact moment, Van appears behind him, his body marked with strange black lines etched by his rune. He tells the leader he has a question for him. The man spins around, surprised, then stands and smiles, resting a hand on Van's head, calling him an oddly curious young man. He tells him they're currently in the year 1500, then asks why he wants to know. Van doesn't answer, too busy calculating exactly how much time has passed inside the prison. Behind the leader, one of his men moves in, weapon raised, and the leader nods for him to strike. The mace slams down onto Van's head, but instead shatters on impact. Van doesn't even flinch, quietly realizing that only 5 years have passed out here in the mortal world. The man freezes in shock, as do the other bandits. With a chilling look on his face, Van turns to his attacker and delivers heavy punches to the other 2, leaving them unable to move. He covers his fist with his gauntlet, steps past them, and lands what look like light taps, except the blows are devastating, tearing the upper halves of their bodies clean away, leaving only legs behind. The last man realizes he's already dead. Van turns and calls out to him, and the man answers instantly, forcing a smile onto his face. Van tells him he has a question. On the continent of Aiden, countless kingdoms have risen over the centuries, all built on the foundation of runecraft. Among them, one stands above the rest as the greatest kingdom in Aiden's history, the Zoe Kingdom, which has dominated the continent for generations through sheer military might. The scene shifts as the man is shown an image of the mysterious stranger. He confirms that the clothing worn by that man belongs exclusively to sorcerers affiliated with the Zoe royal family. Van asks if he's really seen this man before, and the bandit, hanging awkwardly from a tree, flashes a broken-toothed smile and swears he has, insisting he wouldn't lie about something like this. Van presses him for more details. The man explains that a mercenary named Kazarak approached their leader, Digio, with a job offer 5 years ago, claiming it came from someone important. Kazarak told him the request was simple enough: find a specific person and clear out a few villages, promising a large payout in return. Though Kazarak called his employer a big shot, the bandits never expected he was actually a sorcerer from the Zoe Kingdom. With nothing to lose, they accepted the job without hesitation, and since slaughter was already their business, wiping out the villages and covering their tracks wasn't much of a challenge. The man admits burning that many bodies was genuinely exhausting work, but they managed. Once the job was finished, Kazarek paid them and left immediately. Van asks if there was a girl with short orange hair among the dead. The man confirms there was, admitting she'd caught his eye right away, guessing her body was probably burned along with the rest, calling it a shame since she'd been so pretty, mentioning she would have fetched a great price as a slave. The instant he says this, Van's mind flashes back to his wife and her parents. The bandit suddenly realizes something's off, asking how Van even knows about the girl. The moment the question leaves his mouth, Van shatters his jaw with a single punch. The scene shifts to the bandits' hideout, known as DJ Mountain Hideout. Inside, bandits are beating slaves and shuffling them between locations, some children locked away in a wooden cage. One remarks how fresh the kids look, another complains they've been unusually rebellious, calling them trash, while a third points out they sell better when they've still got some fight left in them. In the middle of their usual routine, someone knocks at the gate. One bandit peers through a small slot and spots the beaten man from earlier, who claims he's brought drinks and asks to be let in quickly. The guard questions why he took so long, joking about how long he's been gone, opening the gate and asking if he brought anything good. The moment the door opens, Van lands a punch straight across his face. He tosses aside the severed head of the man he'd already beaten, shoves the guard backward, and crushes his skull. A second guard swings his mace at him, but Van blocks it with his bare hand. The man keeps swinging wildly, calling him a bastard, demanding to know where he crawled out from. Van dodges effortlessly, closing the distance, wrapping his fist in energy, and telling the man to shut up before delivering a bone-shattering blow that blows apart part of the gate itself. The rest of the bandits turn toward the noise, watching as Van approaches carrying the head and body of their fallen comrades. He calls them nothing more than insignificant pests playing dress-up as bandits, tossing the remains at their feet, demanding to know where their leader is. The bandits draw their weapons, wondering aloud if he's completely lost his mind. One asks if he even knows who he's dealing with, just as a massive man in a fur coat steps forward, ordering everyone to stand down. A subordinate turns to him, insisting they can still handle this themselves. But the man, revealed to be their leader, DJ, calls him an idiot, asking if he wants to die, explaining that Van is a sorcerer born with runecraft just like him. He orders his men back and turns to Van, asking exactly what he wants. Van reminds him of a job carried out for a Zoe Kingdom sorcerer 5 years ago, arranged through a mercenary named Kazarek. DJ seems genuinely impressed. Van managed to pry that much information out of his men, asking what he's actually after. Van points directly at him, demanding to know Kazarek's location, promising to spare them all if DJ gives it up. DJ tells him his corpse can answer that question instead, and instantly wraps his hand in energy, landing a devastating punch that sends Van flying. He warns Van that if he plans on lying about sparing anyone, he should at least learn to hide the killing intent leaking out of his own magic. As he says this, his entire body transforms. DJ carries the Blade Rune, granting him the power to cover himself head to toe in razor-sharp blades. He tells Van he's about to die right there. Van already knows talking his way through this won't work. He rises to his feet, glaring at DJ with a chilling look in his eyes, and in an instant appears directly in front of him, driving a bone-crushing punch straight into his chest. DJ coughs up a mouthful of blood. Van follows up with another hit immediately, asking if that's really all the strength he has. Gritting his teeth in fury, DJ calls him a bastard, swinging a fist at him and demanding he die. Van simply steps back, dodging with ease. DJ snarls, calling him a rat, then spins his arms together at incredible speed, launching a barrage of blades straight at him. DJ warns him that he won't be taking it easy just because Van looks like a young sorcerer. He watches his blades slam into Van's body, asking mockingly how it feels to be shredded apart. Fully convinced Van won't be able to take another step forward. To his shock, Van keeps walking straight toward him. He asks Van how he's even still moving, whether he can even feel pain at all. Van slowly wraps himself in his armor, telling DJ not to make him laugh, saying once he's fully covered, this barely even counts as pain. DJ stops spinning at that, gathering every blade into his right hand to form one massive fist, daring Van to take the hit. Van already knows this attack would only scratch his skin at best, the pain far too shallow to register. The kind of suffering he's already drowning in is nothing close to this weak. He clenches his own fist and drives it straight into DJ's, and DJ's attack simply isn't strong enough to hold up. Van's punch crushes his hand completely, obliterates his upper body, and tears through everything behind him, ripping straight through the forest, the shockwave clearing the sky above. Once he's done with DJ, Van turns to face the remaining bandits, telling them it's time they pick up where things left off. They already know they're as good as dead. By sunset, several bodies lie scattered on the ground, each pierced through with a weapon. Van sits calmly among them. The last surviving bandit tells him Zarek is currently in the Nordia Kingdom. Van asks if he's sure, and the man swears he is. then nervously asks if Van will actually spare him like he promised. Van asks if he really promised that. Shaking, the man insists he did, earlier. Van laughs and tells him he was only joking. The man laughs along nervously, saying he'll be on his way then, but Van crushes his neck before he can even move. With a chilling look, he tells the corpse he was joking about sparing him too, asking dryly what exactly there is to laugh about. That night, Van stands in fresh clothes, staring quietly at something. He announces he plans to invade the Zoe kingdom, promising he'll meet Kazarek eventually, no matter how long it takes, saying he wants to confirm everything with his own eyes. He speaks softly to Linda and his in-laws, asking them to wait just a little longer, telling them he made a small gift for them, and asks them to accept it even if his artistic sense leaves something to be desired. The thing he's been staring at turns out to be a makeshift cross built from the bandits' bodies. He pulls out a torch and tells his family their revenge has only just begun. The moment he says it, he throws the torch onto the pile and turns away, setting his sights on the Nordia kingdom. The scene shifts to the Nordia kingdom, where Van is seen beating someone down in an alley on Guild Street. The man gasps out that Anna Dalton will know what he's looking for. Van tells him he should have said that sooner, thanks him for the tip, and steps past the pile of people he's already taken down. Now all that's left is tracking down Anna Dalton, and he knows he can't afford to waste time, since there's no guarantee yesterday's incident won't repeat itself. The scene flashes back to the day before, showing Van releasing a massive surge of energy from his own body, screaming in pain as his magic pours out uncontrollably. He never expected his power to spiral out of control like this, especially since nothing like it happened while he was still trapped in the prison. Magic power itself is an invisible particle that exists throughout the universe, and those who gather it within their bodies and shape it into runecraft are known as sorcerers, essentially living vessels for that power. If the magic ever runs wild inside a sorcerer's body, it can kill them. Van realizes his body could literally explode if he doesn't get it under control, so he presses a hand to his chest and slowly forces the wild energy back inside himself. He manages to reel it in completely, then collapses, gasping for breath, stunned that he nearly died from something like this. Back in the present, Van reflects on how little magic power he currently has access to. He knows continuing to push his limits could cost him far more than just singed hair next time. To safely regain full control of his power, he first needs to figure out why it spiraled out of control in the first place, which means carefully managing the small amount he currently has. While he's lost in thought, someone steps directly into his path. Van tells the massive man to move aside, insisting he needs to get through. The man, whose name is Charlotte Jenny, informs him that Madame Dalton is currently occupied and tells him to come back later. Van replies that he really should have mentioned that earlier, and with a chilling look, states that he's found exactly the place he's looking for, then lands a punch straight to Charlotte's face. Blood sprays from the man's mouth as he crumples to the floor. Van apologizes casually and tells him to just rest for a bit. He walks into the building, which turns out to be a bathhouse. Inside, 3 blindfolded men stand guard around a large hot spring, all visibly startled to see him. The woman relaxing in the water is equally caught off guard, wondering aloud what Charlotte was even doing outside. She asked Van if he's planning on leaving anytime soon. Van casually moves his hand and tells her he's looking for a mercenary named Kazarek, adding that he heard someone here might know him. The woman seems almost impressed that anyone would casually toss around Kazarek's name, calling Van a brat and warning that he's about to die without anyone ever knowing what happened to him. Her reaction alone confirms to Van that he's found the right person. He asks her to tell him everything she knows. She just laughs, calling him a crazy bastard, and orders her men to rip his mouth off and bring it straight to her. This pipe-smoking woman is Anna Dalton, the top information broker in the Nordia Kingdom. Her men obey instantly, releasing their magic and transforming, their bodies swelling larger and stronger, fur sprouting across their skin as they morph into 5-eyed werewolves. All 3 charge at Van at once. Calmly, he unwraps the cloth, hiding the strange lines etched into his arm, muttering that he just wanted to talk, wondering why people always have to make things difficult. He dodges the first wolf's swing and lands a solid punch to its head, then buries his fist into another's stomach, sending it flying. The third lunges from the side, but Van slips past it, and its claws only slam into the wall. Another comes at him from behind, but he sidesteps that too, then wraps his hand in energy and looks up at the 2 remaining werewolves. He rushes them at incredible speed, landing a bone-crushing punch that obliterates them both and blasts a massive hole straight through the building's wall. Turning back to Anna, Van asks if she's ready to talk peacefully now. Clearly not expecting him to be a sorcerer, she admits Kazarek isn't there anymore. Van asks where he went. Anna calls him a punk, reminding him that selling information is literally her job and she can't tell him anything for free. Van asks what her price is. She stands, curious now why he's suddenly being so reasonable. Van clarifies that he's not a murderer. that he only killed those men because they came at him first, and he's fully willing to pay a fair price for the right answers. Anna tells him information on Kazarek's current whereabouts will cost 10,000 gold, insisting that's a completely fair price. Van is stunned by the number, admitting he wasn't expecting it to be quite so expensive. Anna calmly wipes her hands, telling him she simply can't share anything without payment up front. Van turns to leave, asking her to be patient. Surprised, she asks if he even has a way to raise that kind of money, then presses further, asking why he's looking for Kazarek in the first place, wondering if Kazarek killed his family. Van opens the door and tells her to mind her own business, warning with a dark look that he might end up tearing her mouth off after all if she keeps pushing. He shuts the door behind him and leaves. Once he's gone, Anna smiles to herself, remarking on just how terrifying he really is. The scene shifts to Mercenary Street, where Van formally registers as a mercenary, asking the attendant how soon he can start taking jobs. The attendant, clearly not entirely human, explains that while mercenary work is steady, rookies typically wait a while since experienced veterans get first pick of assignments, meaning it could take time before he earns any real money. Van is willing to wait since he genuinely needs a legitimate way to raise funds. He'd briefly considered simply threatening Anna for the information, but he could tell she wasn't someone to underestimate, and he'd rather not stack up more enemies than necessary. He remembers Carrara always telling him to earn things the honest way. While he's thinking this over, a hooded girl approaches the front desk, saying she has a request, specifically for a mercenary with no prior experience. The attendant points toward Van, mentioning he just registered moments ago. The girl turns to him immediately, asking who he is. Van tells her he's the new rookie. She explains her request is simple enough, then pulls back her hood, revealing a strikingly pretty face, and tells Van she simply needs him to take responsibility for one night. This is Leon Audi, 18 years old. Both the attendant and Van are visibly thrown off by her wording. Van steps back, calling her insane, while the attendant helpfully suggests she try a brothel instead. Audi quickly clarifies it's a misunderstanding, explaining she's actually looking to hire an escort. Van simply walks off, ignoring her completely. She calls after him, urging him to at least hear the payment before deciding. Van mutters that he hates dealing with clients who already seem out of their minds. A large, heavy-set man steps up to Audi, offering to take the job instead, asking what the pay is. She tells him 10,000 gold, and Van instantly stops in his tracks. Audi apologizes to the man, explaining she can't risk hiring someone as recognizable as him. He insists he's still far more capable than some rookie, but she declines. He grabs her hand, insisting he's clearly better than Van. She asks him to let go. Annoyed, the man calls her difficult, telling her she should be grateful he's even offering. Van steps in close, calling the man garbage, and orders him to release her immediately. The man is caught off guard by the sudden interruption. With a hard look, Van repeats that he's filthy trash and needs to get his hands off his precious client right now. The scene shifts to a forest, where masked men are burning civilians alive. A man begs desperately for his son's life, but they ignore him completely, killing them all. Once finished, the group reports to their leader, one mentioning it was just a peasant household with nothing valuable, though they figure they can still profit off selling the body's organs. Their leader, clearly not human, tells his men to do whatever they want, then asks about yesterday's job, confirming they're targeting the daughter of the lion household. His subordinate confirms it, and the leader orders him to pick 3 of their best men and keep them on standby. With a disturbing grin, he then orders the young boy he had been torturing to be strung up. The boy is covered in blood, wires still embedded in his skin. The subordinate agrees to prep the men immediately. The leader warns him not to repeat past mistakes, then activates his rune, forcing the man's body upright as he visibly struggles to regain control of himself. The man asks his leader, Merkel, if he's done something wrong. Merkel replies that he hasn't, admitting the boy simply wasn't enough entertainment for him. Grinning with razor-sharp teeth, he suggests it would be perfect if the man dissected himself and hung right beside the boy. The man screams in agony. The scene shifts to Van casually eating steak, Audi sitting across from him, clearly uneasy. She suddenly slams her hand on the table. Van, confused, asks if something's wrong with the food. Audi, horrified, asks how he can possibly eat so calmly right now, demanding he stop using a person as a chair. Van is, in fact, sitting on the unconscious fat man from earlier, using him as a seat, and casually asks if she'd like to try it too. She declines firmly, asking him to let the man go, still shaken from how easily Van had beaten him earlier. Van kicks the man a few more times, telling him not to leak any bodily fluids onto his precious client's shoes, forcing Audi to physically hold him back, warning him the man might actually die. The man begs weakly for mercy. Despite his rough edges, Van turns out to be exactly the kind of skilled, untraceable mercenary Audi needs. Van finally grabs a proper chair and sits down, admitting his other chair had actually been pretty comfortable. Audi scolds him for treating people like furniture. Getting down to business, he asks how far he needs to escort her. She explains he'll be guarding her to the border of the Awana kingdom and that cutting straight through the forest should get them there within a day. Van finds it strange that she'd pay 10,000 gold for a simple escort job, telling her he has a bad feeling this is tied to something far more dangerous, possibly involving a powerful noble house or a fugitive on the run, and asks her to be honest about who she really is. Audi claims she's simply the daughter of a modestly wealthy man who spoils her rotten. Unconvinced, Van leans in close, studying her face for any sign of a lie. Audi tells him he's free to hire someone else if he's this suspicious. Van immediately backs off, insisting he could never suspect his precious client of anything. Audi is visibly thrown by how fast his attitude flips. Van asks when she wants to leave. She suggests sooner is better. He tells her they can go right now, and she's clearly surprised by that too. He explains he'd rather not waste his client's valuable time, and once again she doesn't expect that kind of answer from him. The scene shifts to the Gaseoso Mountains, where Van and Audi make their way through the forest together. Audi mentions they're already halfway through, relieved things have gone smoothly so far, quietly wondering if hiring a mercenary was even necessary at all. The moment that thought crosses her mind, Vaughn suddenly tells her to stop. Startled, she asks what's wrong. He tells her to be quiet, sensing traces of magic power nearby, also known as mana. Closing his eyes, he focuses his senses and picks up 3 people sprinting toward them, quickly realizing there's actually a 4th. Among them, he recognizes Merkel's presence and knows instantly the man is dangerous. Merkel senses him too, raising a hand and calling out that eavesdropping is rude before firing an attack straight at him. Vaughn's eyes snap open as he grabs Audi and leaps backward. Merkel orders his men to seize the Lion family's daughter. Audi asks what's happening, and Vaughn explains that was just a warning shot. The real attack is still coming. As he says it, he turns to see Merkel's men closing in. 2 of them swing blades at Vaughn, and he blocks both attacks with his bare hands. A 3rd rushes toward Audi, trying to grab her, but Van senses him coming, shoves the other 2 back, and delivers a crushing kick to the man's chest, dropping him unconscious instantly. The remaining 2 assassins swing at Van again, but he dodges, grabs Audi, and retreats further, putting some distance between them and the enemy. Once there's enough space, he turns to face the men, unwraps the cloth around his hands fully, and tells Audi not to move no matter what happens. Releasing his energy, Audi grows visibly nervous but agrees to stay put. Van asks the men if they're bandits. One of them tells him to step away from Audi quietly, promising to let him go unharmed if he does. Van smiles and says he'll leave the moment they hand him 10,000 gold. The man calls him a fool, and both attackers charge in, swinging their blades at blinding speed. Van blocks every strike, matching their pace easily while still landing hits of his own. They push harder, moving even faster, but Van keeps up effortlessly, deflecting every attack without taking a single cut. He steps back after testing their limits. One of them admits he was briefly worried Van might be a sorcerer, dismissing him as just some brat. Van releases his energy fully, admitting he was simply being cautious, adding that he honestly didn't expect them to be this reckless. In an instant, he appears in front of them, unleashing a flurry of punches at ridiculous speed, gathering all his power into one final blow that tears both men apart completely, destroying everything around them, leaving only their legs behind. Van casually calls them a bunch of clowns. Audi can hardly believe what she just witnessed, especially since Van looks even younger than she is, wondering how someone this young could possibly be this powerful, already imagining how thrilled and shocked her father would be to see this. Just then, a voice interrupts her thoughts, remarking that sorcerers often size each other up through mana, since the amount someone carries usually reflects their skill level. Van is caught off guard by the voice, turning to find the speaker and remarking that he assumed the man had fled given how long he stayed hidden. The man turns out to be Merkel, who seems genuinely surprised that Van, despite being just a kid, carries the same amount of mana as he does, wondering aloud if he was simply born with it. With a disturbing grin, Merkel says he'll just have to dissect him to find out, remarking that a sorcerer like Van must have fascinating organs. Merkel, also known as the Mad Anatomist, leads the Merkel Gang, a group notorious for murder, human trafficking, kidnapping, and every other kind of horrific crime imaginable. He tells Van he'll make the dissection painless, on the condition Van hands Audi over. Van simply tells him to get lost. Merkel raises his hand, telling him to die instead, and fires a blast of energy straight at him. Van suddenly turns to Audi, asking if she lied when she claimed to be nothing more than an ordinary merchant's daughter. Audi freezes, unsure how to respond. Van tells her to save her excuses. He's not interested in hearing them right now, then grabs her clothes and shoves her directly in front of him, right into the incoming attack. Audi is stunned, realizing what he's just done, the blast rushing straight toward her as she screams that he's a monster. Merkel is equally shocked to see Audi suddenly placed in the line of fire, clearly sensing Van is completely serious about letting the attack hit her. Before the blast can reach Audi, Merkel redirects it at the last second. Furious, he calls Vaughn a lunatic. Audi shouts that she nearly died. Merkel asks if Vaughn isn't supposed to be her bodyguard. Audi snaps at him, reminding him that she's technically his employer. Vaughn isn't even listening at this point, too focused on the fact that Merkel managed to redirect the attack instantly, confirming he's a sorcerer highly skilled in mana manipulation. He realizes Merkel's real goal was never to kill Audi, but to capture her alive. Vaughn can't quite believe Merkel is essentially trying to steal his paycheck. While he's still processing this, Audi calls out to him, asking if he's even listening. Vaughn tells her he'll let her lie slide for now. She's stunned he's brushing off the fact that he just tried to get her killed. Van steps closer, telling her to stop arguing, warning her that he's about to throw her and that she needs to land safely on her own and hide like a mouse until it's over. He asks if she understands. Audi is horrified at the idea, unable to believe he's actually serious. Van tells her to relax, promising she won't die, and before she can protest further, he grabs her clothes and hurls her through the air with tremendous force, sending her flying clear out of the danger zone. Merkel, watching this unfold, releases another surge of mana and calls out, asking exactly where she thinks she's running to. He immediately breaks into a sprint, but before he gets far, Vaughn grabs his leg and asks exactly where he thinks he's going. Wrapping his fist in energy, he yanks Merkel backward and lands a heavy punch across his face, then quickly shifts his stance to drive another brutal hit into his stomach. Merkel staggers back, but somehow keeps his footing, laughing like a lunatic. Vaughn notices something strange. He's certain his punches are landing, yet it feels like something invisible is absorbing the impact. Grinning with his razor-sharp teeth, Merkel promises he'll carve Van up before going after Audi, telling him to look forward to it, calling it an electrifying experience. Merkel's runecraft is the psychokinesis rune, letting him alter the physical state of objects using mana alone, along with the ability to unleash bursts of energy like sudden shockwaves. He raises his hand and fires an attack, and Vaughn dodges sideways just in time. Seizing the opening, Merkel closes the distance and throws a punch, which Vaughn blocks with his forearms. Realizing the man is genuinely skilled in close combat, his whole body wrapped in psychokinetic energy, Vaughn plants his feet and slams a heavy blow into Merkel's stomach, but it barely phases him. Merkel raises his hand again, aiming at Vaughn, who quickly slips out of his line of sight just as the attack fired. Vaughn swings hard, but his fist is stopped cold by an invisible shield Merkel conjures from pure psychokinetic force. Realizing his punches can't get through, Vaughn steps back, clearly irritated by how obnoxious this particular runecraft is. He glances down at his arm, noticing something odd about it. Merkel tells him he's wasting his time, pointing out that while their mana levels might be similar, the actual power of their runes is nowhere close. Vaughn isn't really paying attention, too distracted studying his own arm. Merkel offers him a deal, saying he could bring Vaughn into his organization and pay him several times what Audi is offering. Vaughn mentions Audi's paying him 10,000 gold, and Merkel bursts out laughing, claiming they make that kind of pocket change just from raiding 2 villages, adding with a chilling edge to his voice that Vaughn's clearly underselling his own talent. Smiling, Vaughn asks what exactly he means by raiding villages. Merkel casually lists off assassination, kidnapping, robbery, and human trafficking, boasting that they do it all without asking questions and rake in serious money, then asks if Vaughn's interested. Vaughn grins and starts laughing like a madman. Merkel assumes he's laughing because he likes what he's hearing, praising his own talent for reading people. Vaughn releases a wave of mana, correcting him. He's laughing at himself for even bothering to have this conversation. Merkel is caught off guard. Vaughn settles into a fighting stance, still in disbelief that he wasted breath talking to someone this worthless, then tells him, with a genuinely terrifying look, that he's decided to tear him apart limb by limb until he's unrecognizable. Furious, Merkel calls him an insolent little bastard, stunned that Vaughn would react this way after being handed an opportunity. Before he can respond further, Vaughn appears right in front of him and starts hammering away at his shield. Merkel demands to know what he's doing, reminding him the shield is supposedly unbreakable. Vaughn ignores him completely, his punches growing faster, gradually forcing Merkel backward as each hit lands with increasing force. Cracks spread across the shield until it finally shatters completely. Stunned, Merkel barely has time to react before Vaughn lands a punch straight to his arm, blowing it off entirely. He screams in agony. Vaughn doesn't let up, driving another devastating punch into his chest that sends him flying, crashing hard into the ground. Furious, Merkel calls him an insolent bastard again, declaring he's no longer interested in dissecting him, that Vaughn will now pay dearly for rejecting his mercy. He unleashes his mana, shaping it into a sharp triangular attack, telling Vaughn to be reduced to dust, then fires off a technique called psychokinetic blood strike, the surge of energy tearing toward Vaughn at incredible speed and shredding everything nearby. Merkel is stunned to see Vaughn still standing. Certain their mana levels were roughly equal. He can't comprehend how Vaughn just stopped his attack with one bare hand. Vaughn finds it almost amusing that Merkel actually believed they were on the same level, releasing his own mana and calling him an idiot. The moment Vaughn's true mana hits him, Merkel is overwhelmed, unable to process the sheer amount of power radiating off him. In an instant, Vaughn appears directly in front of him, telling him to go to hell, activating Annihilation Fist and landing a rapid series of punches before Merkel can even react, finishing with a bone-crushing blow that punches straight through his chest. Once it's done, Vaughn calmly picks his cloth up off the ground, wraps it back around his arms, and simply walks away. The moment he turns his back, everything surrounding Merkel's body erupts into a massive explosion. Vaughn doesn't even glance back, focused only on retrieving his client. Runecraft manifests in countless forms. Some grant the power to arm one's body with blades, others let their wielders bend space and time, or tear through mountains with raw force. These are supernatural powers that defy the natural order and break the laws of physics entirely. Among all known runes, the Azura Rune has always been branded the worst in history. Yet because of the boy who now carries it, a new history is beginning to take shape across the continent of Aden. The scene shifts to Audi, sitting quietly beside a tree. The moment she sees Van, she jumps up and rushes toward him, demanding to know if he's lost his mind, asking why he'd throw someone like that without warning. Vaughn slams his hand against the tree right beside her head, and Audi flinches, clearly unnerved by the dangerous look on his face. He reminds her flatly that she's hiding something from him. She falls silent, then quietly asks him not to worry about it. Van tells her he's not particularly curious anyway, then asks for the payment she promised now that she's safely reached her destination. Audi pulls out a bag of gold and hands it over, confirming it holds the full 10,000. Van turns to leave, saying he's done here. Audi calls out after him, but when he stops and turns back, she hesitates and says it's nothing. He continues walking, confirming he really is leaving for good. Audi had actually wanted to bring him along to meet her family, but she couldn't bring herself to drag someone so young into whatever conflict was waiting for her. Feeling guilty about letting him go, she turns and heads back toward her family instead. The scene shifts to Anna Dalton's third residence in the Nordia Kingdom. Van tosses a sack of gold onto the floor in front of her. Impressed, Anna assumes someone powerful must be backing him, but tells him she'll only be taking half the payment, since she wasn't able to fully track down Kazarek, admitting the man is remarkably thorough at covering his tracks. Still, she offers to share what she knows about Kazarek and anyone connected to him. Vaughn tells her to get on with it. Anna asks if he's ever heard of a mercenary group called Tease. He hasn't. Tease, she explains, is a group deeply involved in murder, kidnapping, trafficking, assassination, and infiltration, led by none other than Kazarek himself. The group rose to prominence roughly 5 years ago, and has since grown powerful enough to effectively control an entire small nation. Anna admits it's become increasingly difficult to pin down Tease's main base or Kazarek's exact location, but insists she's not the type to give up easily. She reveals she's tracked down the location of one of Tease's executives instead, pulling out a wanted poster and showing it to Van, telling him he'll recognize the man instantly by the long scar across his face. This particular assassin, born with the concealing rune, has never once failed to eliminate a target. Vaughn figures this man will know Kazarek's whereabouts and asks Anna where to find him. She tells him the assassin is currently in Valhild City, within the Bogra Kingdom. The scene shifts to Valhild City, inside what used to be Merkel's base, now littered with corpses both outside and in. A man chases down a few of Merkel's remaining subordinates with a blade, cutting them down with ease. One of the surviving men turns to face him, demanding to know why he's attacking them. The scarred executive tells him he's simply following orders, guessing the command likely came down because their group failed a job assigned by Kazarek. The subordinate protests that nobody warned them the woman was being protected by such a terrifying monster, blaming the executive for their chief's death. The assassin offers a quiet apology, admitting no one anticipated Merkel would be defeated by some frontier mercenary. The subordinate can hardly believe an entire crew is being wiped out over one failed mission. The assassin tells him to consider it punishment, pointing out they're both just low-level killers in the grand scheme of things. The man laughs bitterly and tells him to go to hell, then orders the rest of his men to attack. They rush out from hiding, and the man declares the assassin will be the one dying today, activating his own rune, the Touch Rune, which lets him summon a massive mana-formed hand capable of free manipulation. He uses it to pin the assassin in place, giving his allies enough time to close in with their blades. The assassin quietly apologizes to them right before activating his concealing rune and vanishing entirely. Everyone freezes in shock, unable to process what just happened. An instant later, he reappears directly behind the man who summoned the hand. Sensing him, the man spins around just in time to realize he's already lost. A short while later, the assassin steps outside the building where another man is waiting for him. The man asks if everything's been handled. The assassin dryly asks if he can't already tell, covered head to toe in blood, telling him to check inside himself if he needs proof. The man insists he can't do that, trusting the assassin to have handled things as cleanly as always. The assassin tells him to leave once he's confirmed the job is done. The man informs him that an investigation has already begun into the mercenary responsible for Merkel's death, someone marked with distinctive black scars around the eyes and neck, clearly describing Vaughn. The assassin asks if that makes Vaughn a target now. The man confirms it with a laugh, adding that this is exactly why Kazarek won't let this go. The assassin tells him to shut up. The man says he'll report everything to Kazarek, then vanishes. Alone now, the assassin lights a cigarette, staring up at the moon, quietly turning over the image of Van's black-marked eyes and neck in his mind. The scene shifts back to Anna's residence. Van mentions the Bogra kingdom isn't far, then tells her, with a dangerous look, that he has one final question, the executive's name. We see the assassin himself, deep in thought, reflecting on how the list of people he's had to kill keeps growing longer. This man is Haka, an executive within the Tease mercenary group. The scene shifts to a young boy and girl frozen in fear before something massive. The girl asks the boy, Megit, if there's any way out of this. In front of them stands a grotesque, snake-like monster with its intestines exposed, rows of teeth lining the inside. It stares down the two children with cold hostility. Megit admits he has no ideas. The creature hisses and raises its enormous claws, ready to crush them, when suddenly someone charges in. The figure leaps forward, fist clenched, and it turns out to be Van. He tears straight through the monster's exposed intestine with a single punch, and the creature has no time to react before its body splits apart, flesh spilling out onto the ground. The children stare in shock as the monster collapses in front of them. Van, wearing a hood, steps closer and asks if they're okay. Shaky but composed, the girl assures him they're fine, thanking him for saving them. Van glances up at the sky, spotting several flying monsters circling above, and warns the kids that the whole area is infested, urging them to leave immediately. The girl insists she wants to repay him somehow. Van tells her not to worry about it, but she refuses to just let him walk away, inviting him to join them for a meal instead. Megit agrees, mentioning their shop isn't far. Van declines at first, explaining he's actually already searching for a specific shop nearby. The blonde girl, Ofen, asks for the name, claiming she knows every shop in the area. Van tells her he's looking for a tavern called the Blue Knight. Surprised, she reveals that's the exact name of their own tavern. Megit finds it strange that someone was actually searching for their place, since it's not somewhere people usually go looking for. Ofen tells him to be quiet, then steps closer to Van, introducing herself as the tavern's cook and Megit as her younger brother. She calls Van their savior and asks his name. He tells her it's Van, and she invites him to follow them. The scene shifts to Van and the children arriving at the Blue Knight Tavern, tucked away on the outskirts of the Bogra Kingdom. Ofen waves to a boy waiting outside, who asks why they took so long, mentioning everything's already prepped in the kitchen. Two little girls run up and hug her tightly. She apologizes to the boy, explaining they ran into a monster on the way back. Alarmed, he grabs her shoulders and asks if everyone's all right. She reassures him they're fine, crediting a kind stranger for saving them. Confused, the boy asks what she means, and she turns to introduce Van, telling the boy, Haka, to greet him properly, explaining Vaughn happened to be on his way to their shop. Surprised, Haka asks why Vaughn would be looking for the Blue Knight specifically. Ofen tells him to hush, then leads Vaughn inside the well-kept tavern, inviting him to sit wherever he likes. Van asks, somewhat curious, if kids actually run this place. Ofen tells him they genuinely live there. When he asks what she means, she explains they aren't really a family by blood, they all came from different kingdoms. The two youngest girls, Lily and Een, lost their parents during the war. Haka's entire village was destroyed by monsters, and Megit's family was killed by mercenaries. By all accounts, these children should have died long ago, but a man saved every one of them, brought them here, and has taken care of them ever since. Ofen explains the man owns the tavern and was their very first savior, then wonders aloud where he's gotten to. Haka mentions he's probably still asleep since he got back late from work the night before. Ofen offers to go wake him and tells Van to make himself comfortable as she heads toward the stairs. She quietly wonders why their guardian would still be sleeping with a guest in the house. She slips into his room and calls out, asking just how long he plans on sleeping. The man stirs slightly, mumbling for her to give him a little more time. She tells him to get up, mostly to help calm Megit down, revealing they nearly got killed by a monster on their way home, and that Megit is probably still shaken. The man bolts upright instantly, asking if she's all right. She assures him she's fine, crediting a kind stranger for the save. The man turns out to be Haka. Surprised to hear about this mysterious stranger, he listens as Ofen explains the man happened to be heading toward their tavern anyway, Realizing it would be rude to stay hidden in his room any longer, Haka decides to go greet their guest himself. Ofen agrees that's a good idea, and the two head downstairs together, where she points Van out to him. Haka walks over and tells Van he heard all about him saving the children, thanking him sincerely. Van brushes it off, saying he was simply passing through, remarking that things just happened to take an interesting turn. Haka isn't quite sure what he means at first, until Van deliberately lets his killing intent bleed into the air, telling him he looks remarkably similar to someone he's been searching for. Haka is visibly shaken, stunned by the sheer weight of Van's mana, insisting this has to be some kind of mistake, that he's just the owner of a small, unremarkable tavern out in the middle of nowhere. Van tells him an informant specifically recommended this place, praising the owner's cooking. Realizing what's really going on, Haka admits he didn't expect to get a referral like this. Van says he'd like to see his skills firsthand. Haka warns that the children tend to get loud whenever he's cooking, worried it'll disturb the household. Van suggests meeting early the next morning instead, if that's the concern. Haka points out the kids will still be fast asleep at that hour and agrees to the arrangement. Van tells him he'll turn in early tonight, and Haka approves, calling it a wise decision. He turns to Ofen and asks her to show Van to a spare room. She smiles, remarking she's never seen him warm up to a stranger this fast, and asks if he's doing all right. Haka forces a smile and tells her that he and Van simply understand each other, that they're cut from the same cloth. Later that night, Ofen leads Van to his room, telling him to let her know if he needs anything. As she turns to leave, Van calls out to her, telling her there's no need to thank him, since saving her wasn't really something he set out to do on purpose. She smiles, mentioning Haka said almost the exact same thing when he first saved her, then wishes Van a good night's rest. She left the room with those words, and Van felt an unexpected pang of guilt hearing them. Later that night, Haka appears at Van's door, blade in hand, slipping quietly into the room where Van lies sleeping. He lunges, thrusting his blade forward, but before it can connect, Van's eyes snap open and he catches it barehanded. Startled, Haka barely has time to react before Van throws a punch. He manages to block with his blade, but the force still sends him stumbling backward. Van rises to his feet, telling Haka plainly that he'd already been expecting this. The scene flashes back to earlier, showing Haka speaking to someone through a holographic device. He reports that a sorcerer with black scars around his eyes and neck, the same one suspected of killing Merkel, is currently staying at his tavern. The man on the other end seems relieved, saying this saves him a great deal of trouble, and instructs Haka to summon him through the formation immediately. Haka warns that Van might sense something is wrong and try to escape, promising he'll make sure that doesn't happen before initiating the summon. The man tells him he'll be waiting. Back in the present, Van tells Haka he finds his whole setup disgusting, taking in orphaned children while secretly working as a killer behind their backs. Haka apologizes quietly, admitting he hasn't exactly been the adult these kids deserved. Van cuts him off coldly, telling him to skip the excuses and just say where Kazarak is. Haka is visibly shaken, realizing Van already knows far more about Tease than he expected, but insists he can't reveal his boss's location. Van tells him that's fine, then raises his leg into a fighting stance, saying he wants to see if Haka still feels the same way after losing a few limbs. Releasing his own mana in response, Haka offers a deal. If Van turns around and walks away now, he'll pretend this never happened. Van reminds him he already tried to kill him minutes ago. Haka concedes the point, then pulls out a paper covered in strange markings and channels mana into it, activating a formation. Instantly, Van finds himself yanked into an entirely different location. He materializes inside a massive cave with no visible entrance, the only opening a distant gap in the ceiling far above. Looking around carefully, Van realizes the space was constructed using a formation. Recalling what Partel once explained to him, formations are essentially runecraft sealed into written symbols or images, and when mana is poured into them, the stored power activates. While paper is the most common medium, formations can just as easily be built into physical locations or objects. Van wonders where Haka's disappeared to, briefly suspecting he fled. The instant that thought crosses his mind, a blade swings at his head from nowhere. He dodges, though not cleanly enough to avoid a shallow cut across his cheek, and senses lingering mana clinging to the blade itself. He steps back quickly to avoid a flurry of follow-up slashes, putting distance between himself and the unseen threat before charging toward where he senses Haka's presence, driving his fist forward. His punch shatters part of the wall, but Haka is already gone. Van notices the man's presence vanish completely again. Just as he registers this, Haka reappears right beside him, calmly warning him never to turn his back on an opponent. Startled by the sudden voice, Van barely dodges a follow-up thrust by tilting his head, then leaps back to create space. Realizing he genuinely can't see or sense Haka at all, not even the faintest sound gives him away. This, he understands, is the true power of Haka's runecraft. Haka stands perched at the top of the cave, arming both hands with blades. His rune is the Concealing Rune, allowing him to erase his presence entirely. Activating it fully, he dives down at Van from above, forcing him to sprint just to dodge. Even in this cramped, narrow cave, dodging blind attacks proves brutally difficult. Locating the man himself is nearly impossible. As another blade swings at him, Van leaps aside, then immediately surges forward at incredible speed toward where he senses the invisible assassin. Haka is stunned to see Van closing in directly on him, realizing with horror that his position has somehow been pinpointed. Before he can react, Van seizes him by the throat and hoists him into the air, telling him that hiding his body means nothing when his mana is still visible. One of Van's eyes turns fully black as he says this, his second manifested armament activating, known as the Truth Eye. It grants him the ability to perceive even the faintest traces of mana, invisible to ordinary senses. Stunned, Haka has no time to process it before Van slams him into the ground with brutal force, cratering the earth beneath him. Coughing up blood, Haka slumps against the nearby wall, admitting that in 40 years as an assassin, Van is only the second person to ever track him down using mana alone. Van demands Kazarek's location again. Instead of answering, Haka asks what Van thinks of his kids, calling them adorable. Unimpressed and unwilling to entertain the deflection, Van grabs his arm and repeats the question, then tears the arm off when he still gets silence. Haka screams in agony, gasping that he's killed more people than he can count under Kazarek's orders, calling himself a man beyond redemption. Van grips his remaining arm, warning him he'll take that one too if he tries dodging the question again. Haka insists he can't die yet, no matter how much the world condemns him, because he still hasn't protected the children the way he promised. He begs Van for forgiveness, then pulls out another paper and channels mana into it. A second formation activates, and a portal tears open above him. A monster leaps out and slams into Van's chest, knocking him back. Riding the creature is one of Haka's comrades, who declares he's finally found the man he's been hunting. Wiping blood from his lip, Van fixes the newcomer with a menacing glare, asking dryly if he can't see they were in the middle of a conversation. He notices his own stomach is bleeding, realizing the monster's claw managed to catch him. The masked man studies Van carefully, trying to confirm if he's really the target, and the fact that Van has pushed Haka this far all but confirms it. He's the one who killed Merkel. Struggling upright, Haka warns his comrade to be careful, explaining that Van somehow tracked him down purely through mana sensing, admitting he can't even begin to gauge Van's actual power level. Impressed despite himself, the man admits he never expected someone this young to be this dangerous. Van cuts in, asking flatly if the man is willing to answer his questions. Confused, the masked man asks Haka what Van's even talking about. Haka explains Van's after Kazarek's location. The man laughs and offers a mocking apology, pulling off his mask to reveal a chilling grin, telling Van that no one here is going to give him that answer. This bald man introduces himself as Betten, another executive of Tease. Realizing negotiation is pointless, Van charges straight at him, fist clenched. The monster beside Betten reacts instantly, lunging at Van before he can close the distance. But Van blocks the strike head-on with his bare fist. Haka reappears behind him at that same moment, and Van spins just in time to see a blade swinging toward him, leaping to dodge as the monster's fist slams into the ground where he'd been standing. Airborne, Van swings a fist down at the creature mid-leap. It raises a hand to block, and Van warns it that blocking is a mistake before smashing its arm into the earth and obliterating it entirely, the monster shrieking in pain. The instant he lands, Van charges forward again. Betten smiles, genuinely impressed by what Van's managed to accomplish as such a young sorcerer, gathering mana into his palm and asking what Van plans to do next, revealing casually that his monsters aren't limited to just one. Several more creatures immediately spill out of portals opening in the air above them, summoned entirely through Betten's power. His runecraft is the Summoning Rune, granting access to a connected subspace where he can store and retrieve virtually anything at will. Van eyes the incoming swarm, confident he can simply tear through all of them. But before he can act, Haka strikes from behind, catching him off guard and slicing both of his knees, telling him he let his guard down. The hit throws off his balance completely, and the incoming monsters pile on top of him, pinning him beneath their combined weight. Van finds himself completely immobilized. Betten approaches, visibly stunned that Van seems entirely unharmed, remarking that a single one of these creatures could crush an ordinary sorcerer with ease. Curious, he asks what kind of rune Van carries, guessing it might be some form of body enhancement. Van tells him he's the only one allowed to ask questions here, demanding Betten answer instead. Amused, Betten says he genuinely likes Van's fiery attitude, offering him a spot on Tease's assassination squad. With an unsettling grin, he raises his hand and activates another rune, explaining that first, he'll need to make Van his slave. This second ability, the Domination Rune, allows him to invade a target's inner world, erasing their existing identity and reshaping it however he pleases. Van is caught off guard, realizing this man wields two separate runecrafts. Betten presses his palm to Van's head, declaring he's about to be reborn. The moment he says it, Betten finds himself pulled into a world blanketed entirely in red clouds, even the ground beneath him stained crimson. Confused, he quickly realizes he's somehow inside Van's inner world. Betten has used this Domination Rune to enslave countless monsters and sorcerers before, never once failing, and he genuinely believes there's no mind he can't eventually conquer. Turning around, he comes face to face with a massive demon wielding an enormous sword, grinning down at him. More demons materialize around him on either side, standing in formation with banners and weapons raised, an entire army assembled and waiting. Betten has always been certain of victory, but he has no idea just who or what he stumbled into this time.